Have you ever stopped to wonder what exactly is lying beneath your feet while you're waiting in line for a coffee in Times Square? New York feels eternal, as if these glass jungles and steel canyons have always been here, reaching for the clouds. But let's freeze the frame for a second. Imagine those mirrored skyscraper facades beginning to melt away. The aggressive honking of yellow cabs fades into an eerie, ancient silence. Instead of the smell of street food, you catch the thick, heavy scent of pine needles and the salt-crusted breeze of an untouched Atlantic. We are falling back 400 years in time. In 1624, a group of people stepped off their ships who looked nothing like traditional conquerors. These Dutch settlers didn't bring heavy cannons first. They brought bricks, tulip bulbs, and an obsession with order. Imagine waking up in New Amsterdam. The town looks like a miniature piece of Europe that was carefully cut out and pasted onto a new continent. You see the same narrow houses huddled together, the same charming stepped gables. They missed home so much, they even started digging canals. In fact, the famous Herengracht Canal used to run exactly where Broad Street sits today. Mornings here smell like freshly baked rye bread and wood tar. You can hear the rhythmic clink, clink of the blacksmith's hammer and see bakers setting out their baskets. This wasn't a city of knights or kings, it was a city of the middle class. Did you know the Dutch brought the very concept of private property here in the way we understand it today? They built for the long haul, hoping their cozy courtyards would stay forever. But behind this quaint European facade was a very cold, very calculated business plan. The port was the heartbeat of this entire organism. If you wanted to get rich in the 17th century, this was the only place to be. Every day, massive vessels from the Dutch West India Company dropped anchor in the harbour. From Europe, they brought fine fabrics, tools, and of course, plenty of gin. And what went back? The ships left so heavily loaded with fur that they sat deep in the water, almost touching the waves. Beaver pelts, that was the real Bitcoin of the 1600s. These skins were destined to become the high-fashion hats worn by every aristocrat in London and Paris. Historians still argue about that legendary deal, buying Manhattan for 60 guilders worth of trade goods. But for the Dutch, this wasn't just a grab, it was a signed contract. The entire city was one giant trading floor. There were no titles of nobility here. All that mattered was your capital, your reputation, and your hustle. But prosperity needed a fist to protect it, and that fist belonged to Peter Stuyvesant. He was a man made of granite, a war veteran who had lost his leg in battle and replaced it with a wooden peg adorned with silver studs. They called him Old Silver Nails, or Stubborn Pete. He absolutely hated chaos. When he arrived in 1647, he found a town drowning in debt and public drunkenness. Stuyvesant immediately cracked down. He taxed the taverns, banned liquor sales on Sundays, and started building the structure that would change history forever. Fearing an attack from the English or the surrounding tribes, he ordered the construction of a massive wall made of thick oak logs on the northern edge of the city. It was a serious fortification, 12 feet high and stretching from river to river. The irony of history is that this wall never actually saw a major battle, but it gave a name to the most influential street on the planet. Yes, that is the origin of Wall Street. Under Stuyvesant's iron-fisted rule, New Amsterdam turned from a messy settlement into a disciplined fortress. But as the sun set over the fort, a new threat was appearing on the horizon. It was a late August morning in 1664. 4 English warships, led by Colonel Richard Nichols, were cutting through the waves, their guns pointed directly at the heart of the city. King Charles II of England had decided that this Dutch nuisance in the middle of his American colonies had to go. Panic rippled through the narrow streets like a wildfire. This wasn't a trade dispute or a small skirmish. This was an invasion force sent by the Duke of York. People dropped their tools, merchants locked their doors, and everyone ran toward the waterfront. The signal bells at Fort Amsterdam began to toll, a heavy, metallic sound that signaled the end of an era. For the first time, the settlers realized that their brick houses and tulip gardens were sitting on the edge of a precipice. The Golden Age had just hit a wall of British steel. Enter Peter Stuyvesant. Imagine him standing on the stone ramparts of the fort, his silver-banded wooden leg thumping against the ground as he paces. He was furious. In his hand, he held a lit match, ready to touch it to the fuse of the city's cannons. He was a soldier to the bone, and his instinct was simple: fight until the last brick falls. But there was a problem. The city was almost out of gunpowder, and the English ships were positioned to turn New Amsterdam into a pile of red rubble within minutes. As Stuyvesant prepared for a suicidal defense, a delegation of the city's leading citizens approached him. They weren't looking for glory, they were looking for survival. They begged him not to fire. They pointed to their families, their warehouses, and the city they had spent 40 years building. Why burn everything for a lost cause? They asked. It was a clash of two different worlds. Stuyvesant's world of military honor versus the merchant's world of pragmatic survival. For a moment, the entire future of the Western world hung on whether one stubborn man would drop a match. The pressure was too much. On September 8, 1664, Stuyvesant finally did something he had never done in his life. He gave up. He signed the Articles of Surrender without a single shot being fired. As he limped out of the fort, he looked like a ghost of the past. The Dutch flag, with its orange, white, and blue stripes, was slowly lowered. In its place, the English Union Jack rose, snapping sharply in the wind. A heavy, ringing silence fell over the harbour. The only sound was the rhythmic clomp-clomp of English boots as the first red-coated soldiers stepped onto the wooden pier. It was a bloodless revolution, but its impact was seismic. In an instant, the name New Amsterdam was erased from the maps, replaced by New York, in honor of the king's brother. Stuyvesant was devastated, convinced he had failed his country. But in reality, he had saved the city. By choosing to surrender, he ensured that the foundation of the town, its commerce, its people, and its spirit remained intact. The morning after the surrender, the residents of the newly renamed New York woke up to a city that looked the same but felt fundamentally different. The transformation was subtle at first. You could hear it in the language. Slowly, the sharp, guttural sounds of Dutch were being smoothed out by English accents. The red brick houses still stood, but the signs on the taverns and shops were being repainted. British administrators moved into the town hall, and the military atmosphere of the Dutch era began to soften into something more commercial. The British were smart. They didn't try to purge the Dutch culture. They knew that to make New York profitable, they needed the Dutch merchants to keep trading. You'd see a mix of fashion on the streets, the practical, heavy wool of the original settlers clashing with the more flamboyant, powdered wig elegance of the arriving British officers. It was a cultural crossroads, and it was here that the city first learned its greatest skill: how to be a melting pot where only one thing truly mattered: the deal. As the city moved into the late 1600s, it literally outgrew its skin. Remember Stuyvesant's Wall, the high timber fortification that once marked the absolute edge of civilization. By 1699, it had become a nuisance. The city was bursting at the seams, and the wall was blocking the path of progress. The British authorities ordered it torn down, and they used the very same logs to help build new docks and structures. With the barrier gone, the city exploded northward. The Wall Street we know today was officially paved, becoming a central artery of the growing town. New shipyards were built along the East River, and the harbour became crowded with vessels from all over the British Empire. This wasn't just a village anymore. It was becoming a hub for global trade. The spirit of expansion was born here. New York was no longer looking back at Europe with nostalgia. It was looking at the vast, untapped wealth of the American continent. By the dawn of the 18th century, the golden New Amsterdam was a memory, but its DNA was everywhere. If you look at a map of Lower Manhattan today, you are looking at the ghost of a Dutch village. The winding, narrow streets like Pearl Street and Stone Street follow the exact paths laid out by those early settlers 400 years ago. The British provided the structure and the global reach, but the Dutch provided the soul. They left behind a legacy of religious tolerance and a fierce commitment to free trade that would eventually lead to the American Revolution. As the city transitioned into the 1700s, there was a palpable sense that something massive was coming. New York wasn't just another colony. It was a laboratory for the modern world. The small, muddy outpost was gone, replaced by a sophisticated port city that was already dreaming of becoming a global titan. So, the next time you're walking through the financial district, take a second to look down. Beneath the tons of steel, the miles of fiber optic cables, and the thick layers of asphalt, the history of this city is still breathing. Those old oak logs from Stuyvesant's Wall are still there, buried in the soil, holding up the weight of the modern world. New York survived because it chose a different path. While other cities were destroyed by war and pride, this city chose trade, compromise, and development. It chose to evolve. From a quiet Dutch harbour to a British colony, to the capital of the human spirit. The city wasn't made of gold, but it was built by people who knew how to turn a dream into reality. And that, more than any wall or skyscraper, is the true secret of New York.